But anyway, filth dominated their environment, their personal hygiene. Really, there was no such thing as their personal hygiene, but filth dominated their personal life, their physical environment. When we understand that, when we understand the magnitude of that, we understand why so many diseases originated in European society. And it also makes clear why Europeans, as they went to invade the rest of the world, no one gave them diseases. No humans gave them diseases. They got contracted diseases from no humans. They contracted diseases from animals, from mosquitoes, malaria, other things like that. But they never, there's no record to my knowledge of them contracting a disease from other people. However, everywhere they went, people contracted diseases from them. And the general reason of understanding for that is they were bathing in disease day in and day out because of the filthiness of their environment. So the disease was part of their physical being. It had been ingested. It had been part of their skin, their genetic structure, their cell structure, everything for so long. And it's sort of like when someone builds up this tolerance for something because they've been around it for so long, but then they come into contact with someone who has no tolerance from it because they have no familiarity with it, then it kills them, even though the carrier, they're fine with it. So that's Europeans traveling around the world, but the reason why they're able to give these diseases to other people is because of the depth of the disease that they themselves carried and reflected. So everywhere that they went, this depiction of European people in the media as clean, as walking around with clean clothes on, as living in clean homes, all the rest of this, that's one of the biggest farces, the biggest lies that have been perpetrated on the minds of Africans and every other people ever. Talk about the hygiene. Bathing was seen as sinful in traditional European society, and one of the greatest examples is of Queen Elizabeth, and I'm not sure if it was the first Queen Elizabeth or which one of the Queen Elizabeths it was, but she had two baths in her life. One time was when she was born, and the other time was the day before she got married. Those are the only two times in her life that she bathed, or she was bathed. European society, in terms of the bathing, in terms of the baths, the great baths that they have, this is a result of their invasion and civilization, if you will, or attempt to civilization by the Moors, excuse me. This is not of their invention. And I'm trying to go through as many things as I can, as quickly as I can. When you talk about clogs, we see in the old movies or shows or pictures of Holland, we see these women walking around in these clogs, and they were seen as they were presented to us as just a style of shoes and a pretty style of shoes. And people didn't know, like myself, when I was a child, I thought that they were cute and unique. That they weren't something that carried another message, but these clogs had to do with the level of filth that existed on the streets. They had platform shoes, if you will, to keep from having to walk around in the feces and urine and other disease matter that was on their streets. And when I'm talking about this, and I talk to people, it's hard for them to imagine this. People have to imagine how normalized that this was, so that it was not seen as unusual, as something like bathing was seen as a sin, that people didn't have toilets in their homes, even though the Moors brought the plumbing. And when the Moors left, they destroyed a whole lot of that. They went back, as Zachary Clark would say, into another dark age. And it's difficult for people to grasp the being in a place that's just filthy and full of disease everywhere, not just in certain sectors of town or what have you, but everywhere it was like this. The clogs were used because they elevated the feet up above the slime and the crap that was on the streets. And it wasn't that everything was seen as bad. It was just certain things you just didn't necessarily want to be walking around in. You didn't know what you were going to step on. What's related to that in this understanding is the concept of look out below. When I was a child, that was given in movies, particularly pirate movies, with the crow's nest, which was that place on the top of the main mast where a person could could stand and they take their telescope and could see far from the highest point in the ship. And the lie that was given was that this lookout below came from that where this person might drop something. They might drop the telescope, or they might drop their knife, or they might drop something, and they would holler down to the ship, look out below. So if anybody was beneath them, they would know to scatter so that they wouldn't get hit with whatever it was that was falling. That's not where it originated. It originated in traditional European society, in British society, where these people urinated and defecated into pails in their homes, and they would toss what was in the bucket out the window onto the street. And before they tossed, they would say, "Look out below." This is also also is argued that umbrellas originated in the same way because of that. That I haven't seen evidence of. I've only heard stories relative to that. But I do know about the lookout below, and I do know about the bodily waste being tossed out windows into the streets because there weren't bathrooms. As time went on, the well-to-do had plumbing systems or bathrooms developed in their homes that allowed for waste to be removed from their homes, but in general that was not the case. So you can imagine as many people who lived there, the thousands and thousands of people who lived in England who daily defecated and urinated into buckets and tossed this out on the street. And the accumulation of this, and there wasn't a sanitation system, there weren't street sweepers, there weren't trucks that came by to clean this stuff up. It just became part of the street. Of course, you never know this from looking at the movies that they show. You think that these cobblestone streets that they rolled their beautifully horse-drawn chariot down were immaculately clean. These were filthy urban settings, not just dirty. These were filthy urban settings. It's I guess another example is of the Rhine River, which is one of the largest, if not the largest river in Europe. And on the sides of the Rhine River, the factories existed and the stores existed, and there was this bank, if you will, that went down to the Rhine River from these factories, from the store. And a lot of these places process meat, so the parts of the cow or the pig or the goat or the dog that they didn't eat, that got skinned off or cleaned out of this animal, it was tossed out onto this embankment. And we're talking about day after day after day after day, year after year after year after year. This stuff was tossed out, and it slowly, because of its slimy gel-like, if you will, state, it would as it built up, it would start to slow down. So you'd have this long pile of waste going down this embankment. There was so much of this thrown out that it slowed the Rhine River down. It slowed the Rhine River down. There was so much of this stuff that was being tossed out of these butcher shops and these other places that it slowed the Rhine down. You have to realize that this was the ground was. There was no respect for Mother Earth. There's no more respect for Sasiyah then than now. The only reason that these Europeans are running around talking about saving the earth and this green is, as one of their own, George Carlin, said, because they're trying to save their own behinds, not because they're trying to save the earth. They don't have any more respect for the earth now than they did then. So all trash went to the earth. And this trash right here, which came from the innards and the outer of these animals, went into the Rhine as sludge and clogged it up. And you have to also imagine that being the case, the level of disease that just existed in that area alone. You're tossing out the internal organs and the skin and whatever waste it is that from the animal that you don't eat. You're tossing it out into pile after pile after pile after pile to make this one long, on each side of the Rhine, mudslide of waste from the butcher shops, from the other places. The level of disease that would just exist in that. We're not going to talk about the people who died. We're not going to talk about the water. We're not going to talk about the feces and urine and whatever was thrown up that ended up on the street, the kind of the level of disease that existed in this, and you're living in this generation after generation after generation. It's understandable how you could accumulate disease that of those of you which survive, because just like with DDT back in the 70s when they sprayed it to get rid of the insects, a number of the insects survived, and those insects were immune to the DDT, and they had to make a stronger chemical, and they've continued to do that to date, having to keep making stronger and stronger chemicals because the insects have adjusted to that. It's become part of their being, in the same way that the monarch caterpillar eats the poisonous plants and grows up, and that poison is ingested and is very much a part of their system. So these people existed in this disease filth, and this disease filth they had acclimated to. They had become very much a part of their essence. And when they went out to other people who did not live in the situation, which was the rest of the world, people died, if you will, at their sight, in their presence. Upon their arrival, they began to die because these people were filled with disease, and everything that they touched, it didn't turn to gold like it might. It killed. So you had, if you will, carpets of garbage along the run. Carpets of garbage were their streets. Carpets of garbage were their alleys. Carpets of garbage were their homes, which of course brings up another point. Things that we don't see. Straw was used greatly, not just to feed the animals, but it was used as a floor covering in traditional European society. And what I found mind-boggling is not that was a floor covering, which I guess depending upon where you live might be a comfortable floor covering if that's all you have, but what these people did, they didn't have this concept of throwing out the garbage, throwing out the trash, and for those that did, it just went out the window into the street. They would throw the remains from their food on the floor, in the fireplace, on the floor. There are records of Europeans, particularly among the elite of Europeans, who used their fireplace as a toilet to defecate in. There was also major records of these individuals, because they were so gluttonous, which is a result of being in the caves, but of course we can even go further back than that and talk about the Asili and the spirit, but these people were so gluttonous they would eat and then go behind. They had a special room, go into the special room and throw up, and then come back and eat more. And of course, that wasn't into these special cans and plastic bags that were sealed and taken out to some dump somewhere where the disease was contained. This was open air in their homes. So the straw that they had to, if you will, soften their floors, this straw, after a while, because food was tossed on it, bodily waste were also put on it. I don't even want to think about how it smelled. These were thrown onto this carpet of straw that they had, and how they would change it when it got so bad or got so hard or got so slimy, they just would lay down another layer of straw. That's the part that was mind-boggling to me. They wouldn't clean it out, didn't sweep it out, didn't have somebody come in and pull it outside for them or what have you, or push it outside themselves. They just had somebody come in because the waste and the decay and the bacteria and all the rest of that, of course, the straw would settle. It would break down like when you are decomposing leaves in your compost, and they would just lay another layer of straw on top of that, and that would be a fresh carpet for them to begin to waste on again. It helps us to understand why the quote-unquote Black Plague occurred in Europe, and help us understand why there were multiple Black Plagues. There wasn't just one. There were multiple Black Plagues in traditional European society. One of the most telling things about Europeans is the fleas on the rats, the disease it carried. The fleas carried the quote-unquote Black Plague disease. And it's so mind-boggling to me how everywhere they have gone, everywhere they have civilized, all of the things, all the negative things that had to do with them came with them. There were rats on the ships that carried us, the slavers that carried us over here. Everywhere they went, they took the disease and the carriers of their disease with them. So in places where we live, in New York City, there are more roaches than there are people on this planet, because this is the infestation that they bring with them. We have to remember the stories like the Pied Piper and understand that these stories are based upon reality. This fiction is created out of events that are going on or situations or circumstances that are going on.